Motivation is why you start. Discipline is why you finish. And the gap between those two sentences contains the entire explanation for why most people who genuinely want to build wealth never do. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunity, because they have been building on the wrong foundation. On a resource that feels powerful when it is present and disappears without warning when it is not. On a feeling. And feelings, applied to long-horizon financial behavior, are the most unreliable building material in existence. The financial industry knows this and says almost nothing about it. Because motivation is sellable. Courses are built on it. Conferences are organized around it. Content about it generates the specific emotional response that platforms reward with distribution. Discipline is harder to sell because it is not a feeling. It does not produce the 3-minute elevated heart rate that motivation content reliably delivers. It produces something quieter and more durable and significantly more valuable. It produces the behavior that continues after the feeling is gone. That behavior is the entire difference between the person who talks about building wealth and the person who does. He understood this at 32. Not from a book, from the specific and private experience of watching his third consecutive financial plan collapse, not because the plan was wrong, but because the plan required sustained motivation to execute and motivation, as he had learned twice already, is a weather pattern rather than a climate. It arrives. It departs. It cannot be scheduled, cannot be reliably summoned, and cannot be trusted to be present on the ordinary Tuesday in February when nothing is exciting and the account balance is unchanged and the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels larger than it did when the plan was new. The plan had been good. The analysis had been sound. The intentions had been genuine. What had been absent was the one thing that no financial plan he had ever encountered was designed to provide. A structure that executed independently of whether he felt like executing it. Go to the comments and write Tuesday in February if you know exactly what that feels like. Because the specific flatness of an ordinary day in the middle of a long financial plan, when the initial motivation has faded and the destination is still distant and nothing is reinforcing the behavior except the behavior itself, is where most wealth building attempts end, not in crisis. In the quiet collapse of a system that was built on a feeling that the feeling eventually stopped providing. Here is the behavioral science that explains what he eventually understood, and that most financial motivation content is structurally incentivized to never tell you. Motivation is a neurological event, a specific pattern of dopamine activity in the brain's reward system that is triggered by novelty, by the anticipation of a significant outcome, by the emotional charge of a compelling vision. It is real. It is powerful, and it has a half-life that behavioral researchers have measured with depressing consistency. The motivational charge of a new financial goal typically degrades significantly within 2 to 3 weeks of the goal being set. The novelty fades. The anticipation habituates. The emotional charge that made the goal feel urgent and possible becomes the ordinary background of a plan that has not yet produced visible results. The brain is not designed for long-horizon financial behavior. It is designed for immediate feedback, visible progress, and the kind of reward proximity that the Paleolithic environment could provide. Financial wealth building violates all 3 of these requirements simultaneously. The feedback is delayed. The progress is often invisible or expressed in numbers too abstract to produce genuine emotional reward. And the reward itself is separated from the behavior by a time frame that the evolved brain processes as effectively infinite. Motivation cannot bridge that gap, not reliably, not across the years that compounding requires. The only thing that bridges it is structure. The specific, external, friction-reducing, behavior-automating architecture that executes the right financial behaviors independently of the internal state of the person they are designed to serve. Here is the specific distinction that reframes everything he eventually built and that most financial advice never makes explicitly. Motivation works by changing how you feel about a behavior. Discipline works by making the behavior independent of how you feel. These are not different degrees of the same thing. They are different mechanisms producing different outcomes with different durability. A person building on motivation is rebuilding their willingness to act every time the motivation fades and must be resummoned. A person building on discipline is executing a system that does not require willingness because it does not ask for it. The savings transfer happens automatically. The investment contribution is scheduled before the money arrives. The financial behavior occurs regardless of the Tuesday in February. He rebuilt his entire financial architecture around one principle. No financial behavior that matters should require a decision at the moment of execution. Not because decisions are dangerous, but because decisions require cognitive resources that are depleted by the ordinary demands of a day, that are compromised by emotional states, that are susceptible to the specific reasoning of a tired mind looking for the path of least resistance. The decision should be made once, in a high-quality cognitive state, when the reasoning is clear and the values are present and the long-term interest is genuinely accessible to the mind doing the deciding. Then, the structure should execute the decision indefinitely, without asking again. Comment once and done. If that principle just reorganized something in how you think about your own financial behavior. Because the single most powerful financial move most people can make has nothing to do with investment selection or market timing. It is the removal of the daily decision from behaviors that should be non-negotiable. Automating the savings before the money can be redirected. Scheduling the contribution before the month generates competing claims on the same capital. Building the architecture that makes the right behavior the default rather than the choice. The research on default effects in financial behavior is one of the most robust and least applied bodies of evidence in all of behavioral economics. Studies on retirement contribution rates find consistently that when contributions are opt-out rather than opt-in when the default is, participation and the choice required is to exit rather than to enter, participation rates increase by margins that make every other intervention look negligible by comparison. The behavior does not change because people become more motivated. It changes because the structure changes. Because the architecture makes the right behavior automatic and the wrong behavior the one that requires effort. He applied this principle across every financial behavior that his previous motivation-based system had failed to sustain. Savings automated. Investment contributions scheduled. Spending categories pre-allocated before the month began rather than managed reactively after it ended. The entire financial system rebuilt around the assumption that his future self would face the Tuesday in February in some emotional and cognitive state he could not predict, and that the system should not require the Tuesday in February version of himself to make good decisions. That version should walk into a financial life already executing correctly and find nothing requiring his intervention except the occasional review. The result was not dramatic. That is important to say clearly because dramatic is what motivation content promises, and the absence of drama is the proof that discipline is working rather than the evidence that it is not. The savings accumulated without event. The investments compounded without requiring ongoing enthusiasm. The financial behaviors that had previously collapsed whenever the motivation faded continued executing because the execution no longer depended on the motivation. This is what financial discipline actually looks like from the inside, not the willpower-intensive, teeth-gritting, daily recommitment version that most self-improvement content presents. The architectural version, the system that was built carefully once and that runs quietly, without drama, producing its results in the background of a life that is not organized around monitoring and managing the system, because the system does not require monitoring and managing. He calls it the difference between being the athlete and being the coach. Motivation tries to make you a better athlete every day. Discipline builds the training structure that the athlete inhabits without needing to decide to inhabit it. The athlete does not decide each morning whether to train. The training is the condition of being in the program. The decision was made when the program was designed. And the program runs regardless of how the athlete feels on any given morning. Here is the final insight that ties this entire investigation together. The reason motivation feels more powerful than discipline is that it is louder. It produces the specific, elevated internal experience that the brain associates with capability and progress. It generates the feeling of being someone who is about to do something significant. Discipline produces no such feeling. It produces results. Quietly, consistently, without announcing itself, in the accumulated difference between the account balance in month 1 and the account balance in year 10 of a system that executed every month regardless of whether the person it served was feeling motivated or not. Feelings are not nothing. Motivation is not worthless. The initial energy that starts the savings habit, that triggers the account opening, that produces the first automated transfer, that energy is real and useful and worth cultivating. What it is not is sufficient. What it cannot be trusted to do is the thing that compounding actually requires. The sustained, undramatic, relentless continuation of the right behaviors across the months and years and decades that turn the first transfer into something genuinely significant. Only structure does that. Only the architecture that executes without asking. So here is the question that closes this investigation. In your financial life right now, what behavior are you relying on motivation to sustain? And what would it look like to build a structure that removed the motivation requirement entirely? Go to the comments and write your answer honestly. Because the gap between the financial life you intend and the financial life you are actually building is almost always located exactly there. In the behavior that requires a feeling to execute. And the feeling that keeps not showing up on the Tuesday in February